Welcome back again to Politics for the Culture. I'm your host, Senator Dwight Bullard, always here to talk about politics for us and by us. Once again, we're going to have a dynamic guest, really a man of the people, somebody who is unfamiliar to some, but does a critically important job for the people of the state of Florida, and somebody I've known for a very, very long time, since his good old days at the illustrious Florida A&M University. I want to bring none other than the hip-hop lobbyist himself, Mr. Phil Singleton. Come on and join us on Politics for the Culture. How you doing today, Phil?
I'm good, Senator. Thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate you the invite and at least let me be a part of the conversation this evening.
Oh, man, thank you for joining me, man. I mean, this is a new venture for me, but nothing unfamiliar for the things that we talked about 1,000 times or more, right up there at, on the highest of Seven Hills, man. So thank you for joining me. So really, when we think about lobbying, right, some people have some idea what it is. Some people think it's a dirty word altogether. For the layman out there, for the everyday person, why is lobbying important and why do you lobby?
Well, first, thank you for the question. I think the clarity of it is, because I've had this before, a lobbyist doesn't work in a hotel lobby, essentially. A lobbyist is basically a third-party agent. You can look at them as a sports agent or basically someone who works for an organization or entity and represents their interests in the process. And really, by representing their interests is mainly a fact of having the relationships, understand the policy-making process or the appropriation-making process to get resources that come down from the state or federal government or even local into local communities. And real quick, my son's in the background having dinner, so if you hear a kid in the back, it's just Big POTUS having his nightly meal, if anything.
Not a problem, by all means. Definitely, we keep it 1,000 here on Politics for the Culture, so we're all about the family, man. So Big POTUS decides he wants to step into the room. We understand that as well. So we hear about lobbying generally in terms of like the federal government, right? And you hear this term. So basic civics for folks. There are 435 members of the House of Representatives, another 100 members of the U.S. Senate. And then they talk about this statistic that there are 34 lobbyists for every member of Congress, which is an amazing number when you think about it, and oftentimes daunting when people talk about who really runs Washington, D.C. and places like that. Now, we know that you work in Florida, in the Florida Capitol. So again, basic civics lesson for folks. In the state of Florida, we have 120 members of the House of Representatives, another 40 members of the state Senate. From your vantage point, how many lobbyists, are out there registered ballpark? And then for the culture, how many of those are Black folks?
Well, we have approximately 1,800 lobbyists in the state of Florida. But of that, you only have 60 that are Black or Caribbean, African American.
I don't want you to skirt past that too quick. Say get that number to the folks again. So you said there are 1,800 registered lobbyists approximately in the state of Florida,
right?
And only 60 of them are Black.
Right, and the number diminishes smaller because some of those lobbyists end up being in-house to whether work for an organization, let's say Walmart or Disney, dental association, a nursing home or whatever, right? So they'll be more in-house for the organization. But when you get down and you dwindle that number further down, you have a contract lobbyist who is essentially someone who can work on a plethora of issues for the most part. But at the main time, it's like they represent individual organizations instead of working in-house for a corporation. So that number ends up being about 10 to 15 when you really get down to it. But it's one of those numbers that are very minor in aspects of representation of what. Why?
Well, not the why. I'm curious. I guess you're one of those numbers, right? Why does representation, in your opinion, matter, right? Like, why is it important for Black people to get involved in the lobbying game? And what are you kind of helping to try and drive those numbers up?
Yeah, I do help. I mean, by starting the conversation for the most part, by really looking at the career path that most Black folks take in this process, I feel that lobbyists are important. I mean, let me get the question again. I do have my son in the back, which kind of distracted me a little bit, but let me get the question one more time. I just want to make sure I answer it more than anything. Sorry about that.
So yeah, why do you feel that representation matters?
Yeah.
And then also, how are you helping to drive that number up?
Representation matters because every issue ends up being a Black issue, and it's the fact of when you're in this process, you need someone who can actually take your issue from cradle to grave. And a part of that is at least understanding the process, but at the same time saying, people are passionate about different things. You have people who are very passionate about education, about the environment, about jobs, whatever it may be. And there has to be someone essentially who's carrying that. And a lot of times we look at politics as, we'll elect somebody Black to really hold on to whatever semblance of what we need out of politics. But what they don't realize is that same senator or representative that they elect is being pulled by not only the local governments they represent, the hospitals they represent, the schools they represent, the school boards, the different elected officials, and having the priorities that are there, that a lot of times they end up saying, okay, who's carrying this small nonprofit who only needs maybe $50,000 to $100,000? Who's taking care of them? Because somebody has to specifically handle these issues. And that's where lobbyists ends up being more beneficial across the board. One of the ways that I really at least help is try to give opportunities. If I always believe in giving more quality work than quantity. And I feel that if I get to a point where I can't take the bandwidth of more clients on, but I feel that there's an opportunity to partner with someone, to work with someone in this process, give them some experience, and at least understand and get their feet wet behind a certain issue or whatever it is, at least working with them to get that there. The hardest part is there's not a lot of access because a lot of folks don't see the career path to be a lobbyist, and they'll end up having conversations with folks who end up putting a roadblock in their mind on what the possibilities are in this business. But there's a lot of room for growth because there's not a lot of representation, at least in our culture.
Totally understand that. So exploring that and kind of going down this path a little bit more, right? So, Florida has $100+ billion budget, that goes into a lot of different spaces. A lot of that money gets doled out. Why is it important for mom and pop organizations, mom and pop small businesses in Black communities to think about maybe getting a lobbyist and maybe even getting a lobbyist like yourself?
I would say this. I'll actually give a real world example, if possible. I represent charter schools, a charter school, or two charter schools, in Jacksonville, that are mom and pop charter schools that are started back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And essentially, you have public schools that were failing in urban core, but these schools are able to provide top quality education for the most at-risk kids in Duval County. And they've done it for over 20 years. The issue ends up being through the representation part. The mom and pop charter schools that have done a great job in our local communities are being pushed out by the big boy charter schools, the Kipson idea, the Somersets, and the ideas of charter school system. And essentially having someone represent them in this situation and be like, hey, who's making sure that the mom and pop charter schools can situational. If a school board decides to shut a school down because it's failing, it's a public facility, that school that's been around for 20+ years, if they have passing grades, should be able to get equal footing along with the big boy charter schools because they've at least paid their taxes, their dues for 20 years, been in the community. But right now they would be wiped out essentially to say, okay, who really cares about Black owned and operated charter schools? It's not really a heavy Democratic issue because they'll be more on the public school side of it. It ended up falling on the Republican side, but at the same time, it's like, are they focused on the charter school from a profitability charter management organization standpoint, or actually someone who's been in the trenches the whole time to get that? So at least having and sparking that conversation is helpful. That's one of the reasons why I actually started my firm back in 2014, because I realized that there wasn't a lot of representation, not only in the hip hop urban culture, but also from the nonprofit, minority, millennial sector, whatever it is, because there's a lot of talent and a lot of things of value that happen in the political process, but there wasn't a representation that says, you know what, I know you asked for my vote last October, November, but now it's March, April, I need something done. I'm at least able to work with organizations to come in and say, hey, let me help you navigate the process, introduce you to a couple of elected officials, and at the same time, secure some resources for you in the process, just to make it a worthwhile endeavor, so you can do your job better, and really provide for your community in whatever pocket of the state you're in, to really do whatever you do a lot better, I would say.
I like the way you touched on the idea of folks folks who are for the culture, folks who are, embedded in the culture, folks who are millennial, younger, even Xennial, folks being involved. I would love for you to kind of give us a pathway. How did you get started? What's a good entry point for somebody who may be, thinking about, hey, I got the gift of gab, or I have the ability to move people, and maybe thinking about lobbying? What's a good first step for somebody to get involved?
I started off as an intern, an unpaid intern in the process. I felt that the internship was very beneficial to me. I realized that the gentleman I was working with was a freshman member, but I also realized a freshman in high school and a freshman in college wouldn't be at the top of the totem pole. So I interned there. But one of the things that really helped me was understanding how to write law, because even though every lobbyist, they'll touch on different areas, the main structure that you need to know is the difference between shall, must, and may. Also a difference of how the process works, like from the committee structure standpoint, when a bill gets filed, the deadlines and things like that. And I think that really having some institutional knowledge that you'll learn from an internship or a perspective or a staffer will really give you some kind of upper footing, more than anything, just to at least not only understand the process, being able to see kind of the ebbs and flows. I was told early on in my career that in Florida, you really need at least 5 or 6 sessions to get a full grip of it, because it's only 60 days. So you'll really, by the 3rd year, you'll see a lot of things that'll transpire. But by the 5th year, your 5th session, you'll see really how the entire process really moves. And I think that understanding how that process moves, understanding really having that experience, building those relationships, it'll be key. But the biggest thing is, I would say, have an inkling towards something you're passionate about. I mean, when I started, I was more in my last semester at FAMU, fired from my day job. I was just taking an unpaid internship to see where it would take me. But then I found out that there was a lot of things that I had experience with through customer service. And I was a bag boy, banker, front desk clerk in different areas, to where I could see the policies I was working on impacting those same people I used to work with years ago. So I think that when I really focused on that and saw, you know what, I can remember Mr. Pate at the bank, or other people who may own car dealerships or whatever it may be, and say, you know what, I can kind of see how this policy will impact them. But at the same time, when I was working overnight at Target, and I remember the grandmothers I was working with who were working 2nd and 3rd jobs to take care of their kids, or their kids' grandkids, or kids, whatever, right? It's a fact of like seeing how a random policy would impact Miss Shirley I used to work with. And it's like, you know what, it kind of drives my passion to make sure that a lot of things are happening in the political sphere that would benefit these people I used to know and be associated with in previous lives, more than anything.
Nice. So from your vantage point, do you feel somebody coming out of any sort of field or any major could potentially be a lobbyist, or do you think somebody needs to get that grounding in political science?
I don't think they do. It was I'm quite sure you remember the gentleman, Bill Peoples, the lobbyist. He's been a great mentor to me. Older white gentleman, and he told me in the 70s it was actually frowned upon for lobbyists to be lawyers, or lawyers to be lobbyists. And I think that in the 80s, 90s, even with the national politics, we hear of a lobbyist, you end up walking in and learning that a majority of them end up being lawyers in themselves. But I would say even some of the best lobbyists I know end up not being lawyers, just from a fact of understanding people, understanding the process, and understanding how things work. And I really feel that you don't need to have a political science background. I think you just need to have the passion to do something, because there's so many opportunities in this space. But the reality of it is government touches everything. So even if you don't care about politics, government is still going to impact your industry one way or another, whether you're in tech, healthcare, or whatever. You're going to be in a policy or a structural framework on how you need to operate within a locality, within a state, within a region of the country, or whatever, so that there's going to be something that's impacted. So I think that anybody can be involved. I do feel that the best thing is to at least be somewhat educated on some of the processes, whether you're in a super conservative legislature or if you're in a super liberal state or legislature or assembly. You have to operate those things differently, but at the same time, just having an open mind and perspective to eliminating the national narrative on how politics works and actually getting inside and knowing some of the people, being educated on not only what you do, but also where the process is in general. Because sometimes it's not even a fact of Republicans or Democrats not liking your project. Maybe they're just not educated on it. Maybe they just don't know, because in certain states like Florida, we have part-time legislators. So if they're doing if you're planning, or if you're a planner, or you have a CPA, or you're doing your own thing for 360 days of the year, it's kind of hard to learn something new within 60 days and be able to be an expert on that. So at least taking whatever your expertise is, having some patience, building some relationships, and at the same time educating elected officials along the process, along the way, because that's the biggest thing. I think collectively with our culture, we don't take the time to learn the process, and then at the same time, we don't really cultivate the relationships or the knowledge of the process to cultivate actual success in the process.
Definitely feel that. So as you can see, this is Politics for the Culture, Phil, and you are the hip hop lobbyist. So I got to ask you a question about hip hop, right? So, you know, you got to take that journey from Jacksonville down I-10 to Tallahassee, you know, to the Capitol. So I'm curious, what is it that you're listening to? What's the song that you pumping on your way to the Capitol? And then after some very tough meetings with some very interesting people, what's the song that you playing that you first are gonna hit play on?
I was stuck on Rod Wave for a minute, Green Light. So Rod Wave, Green Light, at least going to the Capitol would be very appropriate, I would say. And Kendrick's Rich Spirit will probably be leaving the Capitol, because I really have more successful days than negative days when I'm in the building. So at least having that semblance of music going, just to keep me level. But Raw Wave, Green Light, Kendrick, Rich Spirit, probably my two right now. Whether riding the whole way to Tallahassee or at least when I'm literally about to walk up the stairs to the Capitol.
Got it. So, you know, I know it's hard to believe, but at this point, you're probably one of the OGs in the game.
Yeah, I know, right?
in comparison to other folks. So in terms of like how folks can reach out to you, contact you, get mentorship, where can they reach you at? How can they find you?
You can find me on all social media platforms at Hip Hop Lobbyist, HIPHOPLOBBYIST. Also on LinkedIn. I've been told and asked to set my LinkedIn game up. So you can find me on LinkedIn at Philip Singleton. And I'm very responsive for the most part. Just reach out. I'm not a super celebrity. And the biggest thing is lobbyists are more in the background. We do selfless work. It's more the elected officials and other folks who take credit for the things that end up happening, even though we end up working through the process. So I'm very responsive. So you don't have to worry about, you're reaching out to some big wig guy, nothing like that. I don't have a haircut for the interview. I'm late this week, right? So either way, the biggest thing is just I'm an open line of communication. I want to see more of us in the process. I always tell a good friend of mine, I know Mario Bailey, Senator, I always told him if we're in this game another 40 years, we need to have at least 40 to 50 brothers and sisters behind us just to make sure that we're breaking those generational cycles of nothing happening in the political process. And I do feel that collectively, if we can all connect and point each other in the right direction, that will be beneficial to the culture, not only in Florida, but throughout the nation.
Well, thank you, Phil, for joining me. Thank you for, the insightful wisdom that you dropped on folks who may be sitting around. Like, I appreciate the fact you talked about your journey at Target. So there could be a brother who's sitting at Target right now trying to figure out where I'm going to move next. So thank you for dropping jewels on the folks, and thank you for joining me on Politics for the Culture, my brother.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you, Senator.
All right. Checking with you later.
All right.
Once again, folks, Politics for the Culture aims to reach out, drop knowledge, share information on all the aspects of politics, whether it is small p politics to big P politics. We're not here to just talk about candidates or races or, who's doing what in Washington or your state capital. What we want to do is inform you around the way that you can gather information, share information, and become knowledgeable about all the things that are impacting your life on a regular and everyday basis through politics. Oftentimes say that whether or not you care about politics is irrelevant, because politics is going to care about you 365 days a year, 24/7. So once again, thank you for joining me on Politics for the Culture. Look forward to seeing you on another episode.